welcome to a new episode of PR360. And I'm your host, Brett Dice. Please subscribe to PR360 on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Leave a 5-star review if you love the episode. If not, let us know how we can do better to help you as well. Plus, subscribe to the YouTube page to see all of our lovely faces as well. This week, I have Bill Coletti on here, and he's a reputation management and a crisis comm communication professional and a professional development expert as well. He has a wealth of knowledge around managing high-stake crises and issue management as well. And it's great to have him on board. Plus, he's worked with Target, AT&T, American Airlines, Home Depot, Xerox on all their actual reputation and crisis needs. So welcome to the show, Bill.
Brett, glad to be here. I'm looking forward to having a great conversation.
We are as well, but my first question asks all my guests is, are you a coffee or tea drinker?
I am a proud to say black coffee drinker, and I drip for convenience, but prefer pour over for taste.
You're getting into the more of the, I guess, the better tasting coffees when you say pour over. Luckily, I was a former barista, so I know what you're actually talking about.
Whatever. I'm not sure what the name of I guess Black and Decker or whatever. My good morning brew is just a good, simple medium roast that I do 2 cups in the morning and maybe one mid-morning, but I love good black coffee.
No worries. Yes, I love good black coffee too, but I put a little honey in it more, mostly because of my allergies, so it helps with allergies. So it's just put a little bit in there.
Very good. Good. I'm training for a bike race, so I put a little electrolyte in there. So that's sort of what I've been doing.
That's fair. Yeah, I could totally see that.
A little salty. Yeah. But I got turned on recently with take a bad bitter cup of coffee and drop some salt in it. It sort of helps it out.
Nice. I'll have to try that if I ever get some bad coffee.
Hotel coffee.
That's true. I mean, usually most hotel coffees, it's like, well, I have to because I need some.
Exactly.
But I gave a little bit of your expertise. Can you summarize to our listeners a little bit more about your expertise?
Yeah. So Kith, the firm that I run, we are a crisis communications and reputation management firm. That's all we do. So kind of distinct from some of the folks that you've done on PR360. All we do is crisis and reputation management. Grew up running political campaigns, and then from political campaigns morphed into corporate public affairs, issues management, and now exclusively focused on getting corporations crisis confident so that when crisis strikes, they like what they see.
Got you. And we're going to be diving into that and talking about just crisis comm and how much has it changed over the past 2 years or so, and what have crisis experts learned from these past 2 years about crisis comm and what to put in the crisis plan.
Yeah, it's obviously COVID changes everything, and I think pick any topic, COVID has changed it. And I think what COVID's done more than anything, it's just accelerated change. Whether that was work from home or whether that was the future of business travel, but it also changed crisis communications. I think everybody realized that that there are events that impact everybody. It's not just a manufacturing company or airlines that have these types of reputation impacting crises, but it can impact everybody. And so I think it's changed a couple things. It's changed the way leaders communicate, CEOs and senior leaders. Some people got away with not having to communicate, but always communicating through COVID when we had so many unknowns in the early days, and now it sort of feels passé 2 years in. But when we were in the middle of it, there was a lot of unknowns. And so constantly communicating is an acceleration. That's something that we've always seen and we need more of. But also this notion of always be communicating and doing it and communicating early and often. Hopefully a lot of leaders I work with have learned that lesson and are changing.
Got you. And then how does the corporate crisis impact a company's reputation?
Well, I think that people are generally forgiving. And I think if you're a big company and maybe you're a B2B company and you're a company that you've never really heard of, I think crises sort of just, it impacts the way people feel about you. And I talk about it in the context is that a company owns its brand, but the public owns its reputation. And so we, as marketers and communicators, there are lots of things that you can do to control people's, particularly people that write you checks or buy your product or use a credit card to purchase. That you can control that brand experience. You can change price, you can change the experience, you can change the product mix. But I don't shop at BP. BP gas stations are not convenient for me, so I go to others. But I have a definite opinion about them, even though I'm not a customer. And that's where their reputation comes in. So crises impact reputation directly with people that buy your stuff, but it also directs your reputation with the public at large, who may or may not be the purchaser of your product.
Mm. And is there any way to like help, I guess, massage that bad reputation? Because I mean, we've all heard of BP because of the oil spills, and even though BP in California they use Arco to sell their gas, I
Mm-hmm.
or people may not like you and may shop other places. So is there any way to help massage that during a crisis or even a little bit after a crisis? Because we all need brand reputation, and sometimes you need to rehabilitate your brand.
Absolutely. I mean, I think during the crisis, speed. So having done this for about, 20, 25 years now, I think the key differentiator between good and great crisis response is speed. Filling the vacuum of information with a your side of the story. But speed, you're not just fast for fast sake. I think you get fast and it's an equation. And so speed equals the sum of your chain of command, how you make decisions, plus your mission and values. What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What's your ethos? That's what makes you fast. Too many organizations have never had either one of those things challenged. What do you stand for? What do you believe in? And then how do you make decisions? And how do you make decisions when you need to do it quickly? So I think that, improving, the best thing to do to improve or mitigate the impact of a crisis is to be fast in the marketplace, respond quickly, get back to strategy, get back to plan as fast as you can. But that just doesn't happen by a magic wand. It takes a little bit of work around what do you stand for and who needs to be in the room to make decisions.
Mm-hmm. And going in before the crisis happens, how should PR pros now create their crisis plan in a post-pandemic world?
Yeah, super simple. I know you guys have done on the PR 360 podcast. You've interviewed some really, really strong crisis practitioners and have really talked about this evolution from these 3-ring binders to smaller documents and more useful documents. I think it is, the things we can do to become faster. Work on holding statements. There are general basic holding statements that organizations can do to have those prepared and ready. Those should be built into plans. I think chain of command, who needs to be involved, who needs to be in the room in order to make decisions, and then just this reassertion of values. Who are those that matter most to us? Who are the stakeholders that matter most to us? And I'm agnostic. It could be your employees, it could be your first round investors, it could be shareholders if you're publicly traded. It could be any number of different stakeholders, but really understanding who matters most. I think a simple couple of page articulation of a handful of those things really will make organizations better and faster. But more than anything, they just need to think about this, not just do it once, put it on a shelf and forget about it, regardless if it's a 3-ring binder or a 3x5 card. It doesn't really matter. You got to think about these things because these are pretty dynamic situations.
And so is one of those things, updating it is having it maybe in a 3-ring hard copy, but also having it maybe in a like a OneDrive or a Dropbox or something like that. So
Someplace that
everybody,
people can
or the
find
people
it,
that,
wherever that is, whatever that is. That's a cultural issue. Things that for organizations that use Slack, there's people that have it on Slack files, OneDrive, wherever it is. But that goes to the point. You and I could create this for our company X, and if we're not around, people don't know where it is. You have to practice and you have to think and make sure that so you have muscle memory. So it's any athletic endeavor, you need to have muscle memory so that you can perform when you need it most. So I'm agnostic. You can put it on there are apps out there you can put on your iPhone. There are Slack messages, Slack channels where you can dedicate these resources. OneDrive, it doesn't really matter where. People just have to be able to find it and use it, and that starts with them even knowing where it is.
And even though most PR pros or nobody really wants to go through a crisis, what are some keys to actually successfully mitigating or managing a crisis when you're actually in it?
Yeah, so I think that is a lot of the basics. Tell the truth. If you don't know, saying I don't know is okay. Setting a cadence of when you're going to update people, that we're going to get back to you every hour, every 2 hours, every morning, whatever the situation dictates. Using your CEO or your leader, whatever vocabulary you use to define your leader, use them effectively, but everything doesn't have to be done by them. You can have a spokesperson or have a secondary, someone doing the periodic briefings of what's going on. But I think the ultimate goal is we think about crises we think crises in the framework of three different types of risks. There's strategic risk, preventable risk, and external risk. And each one of those sort of dictates a different response based on what kind of risk they are.
Gotcha. And should we be thinking about reputation management and crisis comm as a yin and yang of basically both of it together is like your reputation management and your crisis comm as kind of two ends to each side? And is that how we should do it instead of two separate things? Because I feel like a
think
lot of
yin
times
yang
it's like
is
reputation management
ends and crisis begins. No, I think they have to yin yang and they have to fit together. And I think you're right on. And if you think about yin yang, it's got a large mass and it tails to a small mass, and those two things link together in yin yang. And so absolutely. And so I think you do good crisis communications to improve and maintain your reputation. You do good reputation management to have fewer and shorter crises issues. And so I think they fit together very symbiotically. And so most often in large enterprises, it's those two departments or two disciplines kind of live together and work together. There are people and companies that we work with that really view growing their reputation separate and distinct from growing their brand. And those are the ones that typically are very sensitive and very responsive when they find themselves in crisis situations. And so, yes, that sort of cycle of how they fit together is absolutely key. And it's a great way to think about this.
And so, with that, how do PR pros maintain a good relationship with the public, either with just minor issues, or maybe a little bit of a crisis, or maybe just making sure they have a strong reputation? How can they keep on doing that so maybe the people that buy from them or the community can help them during a crisis?
Yeah. So I think always be communicating, always be telling your story. You don't have to wait for a crisis to tell your story. So I think there is this notion of always be communicating. I find often that less PR professionals and more their executive sponsors or clients, whatever the case may be, gets frustrated when they don't get enough feedback or they don't get enough response. And so I think that there's a discipline to maintain a constant cadence of information so people understand what you're doing. I think you identify key risks, you identify areas that can impact your organization, and then you work to mitigate those risks over time through your reputation management planning and reputation management thinking. And so that you build what we call a reservoir of goodwill, so that when there is a set of questions and when there's context where people are confused, is that you've hopefully thought about some of those things in advance and begin to build that big reservoir of goodwill and build that over time.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, even going on with the community and the public, I mean, the new thing is cancel culture. So is there any way to like make sure that that's not part of the issue or crisis that you have to deal with? How do you maintain that brand reputation in a cancel culture world?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, this society right now is that we all there's a lot of overreaction, and companies are overreacting, and so we've seen this sort of pendulum swing around back and forth from where companies used to say, well, that's not my lane, that's not my concern, and not get involved. But we talk about it in the context of social risk. And social risk are these things where the public has an expectation that big companies are going to talk about important issues that impact all of us as a society. When you step into that area, there is the potential of people, negatively reacting to that and playing out cancel culture and what have you. My experience with cancel culture is that it very few companies that are doing the right thing and are being responsible corporate citizens, that 20% of trolls out there, if you view the world as 80/20s, they're really not impacting the bottom line. They're really sort of more of a nuisance. And so I think being sensitive to what's going on in society, but not being afraid to take a position or take a stand. Haters are going to hate, and there are going to be a fraction of the populace that are going to have a negative reaction. But that's not a reason to back away, because we really need to focus on the mindset and influencing reasonable people and their reasonable judgment, not the 20% that sort of get triggered by any particular concern or issue of the day simply for the sake of the issue. And so keeping your eye on the prize is really pretty important.
And how can companies manage a soft asset like reputation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I wrote a book. I wrote a book about it called Critical Moments, and we articulate this model to do this. And I agree, it is a soft asset, but it is the same. I believe that there's the same reckoning that we had, is that how do we manage employees, employee retention, employees. And so there's a very defined school of thinking around how we create employee engagement, how we create employees to be involved. And now it's second nature for all companies to do that. I think reputation management is at the dawn of doing that. And so it really sort of begins by assessment. It begins by understanding where your organization is, what it can respond to. You then move to awareness, and that's sort of an awareness of the issues around you. Then you figure out sort of what is your organization capable of, and that's authority. And then the last one is action. So we think that's when you then begin creating sort of mitigating plans. If you're a chemical processing plant, what can you do to mitigate risk? And if something were to bad happen, how can you mitigate those concerns? So I think there's a 4-step model, very standard. Peter Drucker's put management principles around just about every aspect of modern corporations. And I think we're on the brink of reputation management being less of a soft asset and actually being a manageable resource and something that you can work on. And we call it that 4A's model is really the system that we think that organizations are embracing. And the folks that we work with have found a lot of satisfaction in that cycle of those, evaluating those 4A's.
And then is there any things PR pros should basically avoid when doing the soft assets or the brand reputation? If there's like things that they should never ever do or something like that?
Yeah, well, I almost don't want to say it, but it almost always needs to be said. Just tell the truth. I mean, don't lie. So if you put it in the negative of the don't lie. Don't make stuff up. I think the other thing you need to do, and it's in that same vein, is saying we are going to do X by date Y and not delivering and not doing it and hoping no one never asks you about it. So we're going to do X in the next 12 months, pick the thing you want to do, but then just failing to talk about it. And we saw that so much regarding Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and the issues of 2 summers ago, is that a lot of people came out and said, we're going to do this by this. And people were held into account. There are groups that are actually watching and tracking. Company says we're going to do X and we're going to do it by Y, and are tracking. And so if you say you're going to do it, whether it's the environment or social justice, whatever the issue is, that to me fits like lying. If Brett, you and I live near each other and you're going to borrow my chainsaw and you say I'm going to bring it back on Friday, I kind of expect you to bring it back on Friday, and I don't want to have to check up on you so that you bring it back. And so it's the same basic model of don't spin and don't tell, in telling the truth. So I think those are two critical things: tell the truth, and as companies make these sort of proclamations with dates and deadlines, update people. And it's okay if you miss the mark, and you just have, there's usually a pretty good explanation. And just being, we just need more engagement and more dialogue, and corporations can stop acting so animatronic or robotic in the way they respond, and don't bounce from issue to issue, crisis to crisis. Really try to keep a plumb line and a focal point over the long term.
Gotcha. And then, I mean, going off the truth thing, is there some things that, I mean, we have some things in businesses where we just can't say. So, how
Mm-hmm.
do you skirt that line between telling the truth and making sure you're not giving away maybe company secrets, or maybe like new product information that you may not want to reveal right now? Is there a way
Mm-hmm.
of like figuring out where's that line? Because there's some things where you just can't be fully 100% truthful.
Yeah, absolutely. So people get emotionally invested, particularly in a crisis. And so I think what you need to do is just meet people where they are, understand what people think about. Being, that's why PR pros are so great, is they really have that ability to sort of be the ombudsman that understands the public. I don't believe, again, that 80-20 principle. I don't believe reasonable people have a reasonable expectation that you're going to explain every aspect of how and what a company does, giving away trade secrets. But I want to know that, company X is not hurting people or not harming people, or that their behavior and practices, and we're recording this while the tragedy in Ukraine is going on. Are you or aren't you doing business in Ukraine or Russia? And how are you responding to those situations? So I don't think you need to give away the farm. I think it's your message. You need to tell it the best way that you can. And I think that focusing on the reasonable people, I think people over index for trolls. They over index in this cancel culture. They over index of what's the negative response. But I think the focal point really should be the responsible beliefs of responsible people. That's who we should be focusing on in these situations.
And for the reputation, let's say it is a little damage, how can PR pros begin to repair that damage with their customers or with people on social media or whatever it is? How can they begin to do that? Because sometimes it just is a little damaged and you have to like
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to do that. So, is there any tips
Yeah.
for that?
Well, I think demonstrate change and consistently prove it. So demonstrate that, yep, we heard you, we understand. Here's what we're doing to move forward. In this hypothetical where, got a little bit of a bruise on a reputation, is that acknowledging it, and then B, fixing it, and then C, reminding people that you fixed it over time, and then hopefully you don't repeat it. That's when reputations are truly impacted over time, is when the negative event gets repeated. And that's when people are like, man, there they go again. That's that company that did it one more time. So fix it, get back to business as fast as you can, and then really sort of focus on letting folks and reminding folks that you have fixed this situation, and that you try to move on to other issues. So, I mean, I think there are a number of models that fit there, but it really just starts with reinforcing the best that you have to offer, and reinforcing that consistently over time. And just because I tell you once that I'm a great person, that's probably not enough. You need to convince organizations and convince the public to do that repeatedly over and over and over.
And I mean, we talked about cancel culture a little bit, but is there, or should PR pros add that to their crisis plan? Is that another one of those new things that we're like, oh, well, we should figure out how to like, if it does happen, if we do wade into something that maybe wasn't the best idea, but we thought it was the best idea at the time, maybe we should add a section or something to that effect. Is there something that should be done with that in the crisis plan?
Yeah, I think I would not have a section called cancel culture. I'd call it social risk. And basically these are risks about society and the impacts that are unrelated to our business operations, and they are issues related to society, and they directly impact populations, whether it be Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ, pick the topic, Trump voters, Biden voters. They impact a group of people, a population, and that's what social risks fundamentally are. So absolutely, crisis plans need to include thinking about that. Your crisis thinking needs to be around, well, corporations are being asked to say and do more in society that is a little bit traditional from what companies have had to do in the past. How are we going to respond? And that's a great opportunity for your chain of command, general counsel, senior leadership team, subject matter experts to really talk about those societal issues and how are we going to respond or not respond. Because I think that's also a legitimate response as well. So yes, these notion of social risk absolutely has to be bedded into the way people think about their crisis response plans.
And what do you see as the future of brand reputation and crisis comm in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you see new things sprouting up to help? Do you see new things that are going to have to be addressed as crises as well? What do you see?
So I think there's a high tech and a low tech. I think there's a digital response and an analog response. And I'll start with the analog. I think that the big thing that's going to change is that an emerging generation of leaders, corporate leaders, are going to be more willing to be transparent and authentic and sort of open with what's going on. Now, I think that I worry that that's going to be too much and that people are just going to be overwhelmed with sort of the marketplace is just going to be overwhelmed with all these corporations, you know, not doing what they really want them to do, which is, provide me a good or a service that meets my needs and then let me pay you and get out of the way. But companies are going to try to be too overly involved. So I think that's analog. I think we're going to see corporate leaders more willing to engage, corporations more willing to think about these issues, more willing to invest in these issues. I think digitally, I think social listening is going to continue to get better. Sentiment is the great thing that every digital sort of everybody we're talking to about social listening is focused on. How do you get sentiment right? How do you sort of aggregate data in a smart way? I think we're going to figure that out. I think AI is going to improve. I think there's some technologies where room to sort of expedite holding statements. I think I've seen some apps that not quite there yet, but are getting there, where you can actually plug in some basic information and it outputs something relatively quickly. I think notifications, that chain of command issue, forcing you to think about who should respond. So I think sort of emotionally at a soft skill, people are going to respond and be more thoughtful about these issues. And then, yeah, I think social media is going to it's going to continue to grow, but I do think our ability to listen better and sort of filter out garbage is going to improve over time.
And you think there's going to be any impact with Web3, with cryptocurrency, NFTs, or anything like that? Is that going to affect brand reputation or crisis comm? Because I keep on hearing everywhere how it's going to change the marketing and PR, but I'm pretty sure some things kind of like, well, this doesn't really affect us at all.
Yeah, I think I think there are a lot of companies it doesn't affect us at all. I think that with crypto and the blockchain broadly speaking, there is an argument that it is more secure and that there's actually a historical context of how and when things are developed. Either one of those technologies. I think there is with any new technology, there is, and when companies embrace it, is that there is room for the public to misunderstand why you made this decision or that decision. And so I think that what I see it changing is the necessity to explain or to be ready to explain. We decided to do this, and these are the safeguards we put in place. Broadly speaking, whatever the issue might be, I think that's where organizations, and that's back to what we were talking about before, that's where thoughtful leaders need to say, hey, there's room, I get it, but there's a room for misunderstanding here. So I'm going to make sure that we sort of pre explain why and how we do it, particularly if we're sort of heading into emerging innovations and emerging technologies.
Gotcha. And then, fun question for you: what strategies would you like done away with crisis comm and reputation management? Which is something that you just hate so much that people or crisis PR pros and crisis comm pros still do, that you're like, no, no, stop it.
Yeah, long form press releases to try to explain things. These are conversations often. And so just, we don't need to write chapter and verse on day one, because it rarely gets done on day one or hour one. It takes too long. And so short, meaningful, a lot of conservation of words is really important. So that would be number one, is that we don't have to craft the perfect 500 to 1,000 word statement. Nobody's going to use it. Headlines and quotes and papers range between 7 and 12 words. So let's focus on those things. Everybody is not going to pay attention to every aspect of our business. Let's focus on what their needs are. So I think the brilliance of long form responses is something that just really, really consistently bothers me, because it slows people down.
Gotcha. And then, any final thoughts for our listeners?
No, I mean, Brett, I love what you guys do. PR360, great podcast. And we've got a landing page. We've talked about a couple of different things. And so there's some kith.co/PR360. If you want to get some additional resources, you can have that in the show notes. So no, I just really appreciate the conversation. I love what you guys do and sort of shedding a light for professionals to hear new and different perspectives. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for being on the show and being our guest and talking about crisis comm and brand reputation.
I appreciate it.
And thank you for listening to PR360. As always, please subscribe to PR360 on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Leave a 5-star review if you love it. Let us know